Thank you very much for coming at the end of a long and stimulating day. I suspect we'll be able to keep you awake. My name is Rick Anderson. I work in the library at the University of Utah, and I'm going to be the moderator for this panel. I'm going to open with just a very quick overview. I'm sure that if you're here, it's because you already know about Sci-Hub. If you didn't, I don't know why you would have come, but I just want to raise a few points by way of introduction. For one thing, it's important, I think, for all of us to bear in mind that Sci-Hub is not an operation that's just kind of technically breaking the law. It is a consciously genuine criminal enterprise that lies and deceives in order to get what it wants from faculty and students. And what it wants from faculty and students is network access credentials. Now, the problem, or one problem, is that faculty and students don't always think of these credentials as network credentials. They think of them as access to content credentials. And one of the many problems that arises when they share these, either wittingly or unwittingly with Sci-Hub or with anybody else, is that in many cases they're not only giving sort of illegitimate, unpaid-for access to licensed content, but they're also letting Sci-Hub and everybody with whom Sci-Hub chooses to share those credentials access to private and sensitive campus information that, depending on circumstances, may include student grades, budget access, and email. And what this means is that Sci-Hub doesn't only represent an attack on the publishing establishment, although that's certainly how it sees itself and wants others to see it. It's also an attack on the integrity of academic information systems and on the privacy of students. Now, there's a coalition of publishers that has been pulled together to combat Sci-Hub. Sari will tell us more about this in her presentation. And the intention is that this coalition will be a broad-based one that includes libraries as well as publishers, because, of course, the integrity of our institutional networks and compliance with our license agreements is very much within the bailiwick of libraries, not only institutional IT organizations or publishers themselves. So with that, I want to very briefly introduce our panelists. First, we're going to hear from Andrew Pitts, who's the managing director at PSI, and he's going to explain some of the hidden truths about how Sci-Hub actually works and who its targets are. Then we're going to hear from Joe DeMarco. He's a copyright attorney who is a partner at DeVore & DeMarco. He specializes in cybercrime prevention and response and in piracy and copyright piracy and enforcement. Previously to that, he was a prosecutor in New York with a similar specialty. And then third, we'll hear from Sari Francis. She's manager of digital license compliance at IEEE. She'll be outlining some of the ways that Sci-Hub poses an actual threat to publishing and steps being taken to combat it. And then what I think we'll do, if the panel agrees, is go through the three presentations and then have a general Q&A. Does that sound good? All right, Andrew.
Thank you. Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for coming along to my subtle presentation. I've only got 10 minutes, so I'm going to go fairly quickly. I could have stood up here and talked to you about this for hours on end, but let's get cracking. As Rick has already mentioned, cyber criminals, they're not just stealing PDFs. On the front page of the London Times quite recently, it was evidence that these cyber criminals are stealing much, much more from our universities, and this was in the UK, but the exact same is happening all over Western Europe and, in fact, all over the world. They're after much more, and there's lots and lots of articles you can see listed here. I'm not going to go through them, talking about what is stolen by these cyber criminals. So the reality of what they're doing is they're phishing, they're scraping, they're spamming, they're hacking, they're password cracking. They're doing anything to find personal credentials to get into our academic institutions. And whilst illegal access to published content is the most obvious target, The security industry believes that this may be the tip of an iceberg hiding an underlying deliberate attempt to steal multiple streams of personal and research data from institutions. So a little example. Individual credentials were published on websites, and we've monitored these for a long time now. And we've asked libraries to take corrective action. For one user of a library in Michigan whose credentials were published after Sci-Hub on an Iranian website, we were not only able to access content through her account and her profile and all of her personal information, but we were also able to track exactly what the poor girl was reading, everything. Now, this just tells you one little example, and Sari's got an even more kind of scary example to talk to you later. But this is a real factual example of a UK university that firstly faced a scraping attack where they took as many usernames as possible from that site. Then, in the middle of the week, they were subjected to a 48-hour dictionary attack where they forced passwords, and they actually managed to get 6 passwords. Then at the weekend, when people aren't really paying too much attention and publishers aren't at work to try and see these spikes in usage, they went in and they accessed 350 different publisher websites and took 45,092 PDFs. When we spoke to the library and the IT department, not only had they broken in and done this, they had changed the profiles of the usernames and passwords, the people's profiles themselves. They changed the cell phones of those people. And they'd planted malware on the computers. And all the computers had to be completely wiped. So anybody telling you that all they're doing is taking a few PDFs is not telling you the truth. So credentials are phished. They're not donated. They do get donated. You do see on Alexandra's blog certain Russian students who are abroad offering to help. But this is a massive scale operation where they're taking, 60-something million articles. They're not doing that by having a few articles donated. Okay, so this is an example of something that happened quite recently where stolen credentials were detected and the password was changed. And what we did for once is we monitored how many attempts with those stolen credentials were made after the password was changed. And the log file analysis revealed that there was 302 further attempts that day. We stopped monitoring after that. The access points came from 12 different countries, including USA, China, Thailand, and Hong Kong. Only 17 of the 302 attempts were Sci-Hub. So what this tells us is very quickly those credentials have been spread around the web. And I'll show you a bit later some of the other sites that these things appear on. And scarily, those same stolen credentials were used from within 34 recognized universities, including one quite famous US one. So these credentials spread like wildfire really quickly. And if you think they're only using those credentials to access scholarly content, they're not. Some of you have probably seen some of these websites. That's Passvans. So this is Passvans. And they trade in stolen credentials for credits. Sometimes people pay for these and sometimes they're free. And don't forget the library user in Michigan whose contents were published online. We saw everything that they were doing, absolutely everything. Now imagine what else a hacker would do with those credentials. Is it the same username and password for all of the other accounts that that person has? Probably. So this is just 3 pages of about 60, I think there were, on Passvans that should scare the life out of people as to how many usernames and passwords they have that work at all of these universities around the world. This is rife, and it's a huge problem. And this is evidence of how passwords are shared amongst different criminal cyber gangs. I think you saw recently where a big Iranian cyber gang, several people were arrested in the US. Some of these were appeared on an Iranian website giving access. But we looked at each of these individual usernames and passwords and we searched the web for them, and we're finding several sites that the same usernames and passwords appear on, including Facebook. They even have YouTube channels now that tell you how you can break into universities. So it's factually correct. These are all being shared around the web. So Sci-Hub, we've touched some of this, but they are bombarding university IT systems with phishing attempts, dictionary attacks. They're hacking personal accounts. The one that really gets me is when they change the cell phones. So even if you have secondary authentication, they've already been in changed the cell phone. So by the time you send them the secondary authentication code, it goes to their own mobile phone, so it's completely useless. Intrusions result in thousands of PDFs being stolen, but not just that, as Rick touched on. It's personal research, it's social security numbers, national insurance numbers, names, addresses. These things are really valuable. When they're traded on the dark web, a set of credentials like that can fetch $75, and they've got tens of thousands of them. They even circumvent CAPTCHA, and I don't know if any of you look at Alexandra's blog. I probably spend too much time looking at Alexandra's blog. But one publisher put CAPTCHA up, and within 24 hours she was up there boasting on her blog that this publisher had put CAPTCHA up, and we've defeated it. We've already written code that will get around CAPTCHA. So they're really clever, these people. And the scary thing is the viruses and the malware that are being placed on computers. That's really scary. Keyboard loggers. So next time you log into your bank, better make sure you haven't been on Sci-Hub's site, right, downloading PDFs. So the damage is it slows down IT systems, personal profiles are changed, as we've seen. I don't know how many emails you've all had about GDPR lately, right? Making sure that we're all compliant with GDPR. How compliant do you think Sci-Hub is with GDPR? They're actively stealing your personal information, right? It's kind of the opposite. Other sites are being hacked as well. And, we don't really get to the truth of a lot of this because a lot of the times the universities won't really tell us the extent of what has happened when these people break in. So there you go. The effort and the time that is taken for these universities to do this. I mean, that one UK university example, that took them days to go through and check all the computers, wipe the viruses, clean machines, change everything, look at what had happened. It's a real big thing. Skewed usage metrics is another one that people don't realize when they're in universities, is that when they go in and they take 48,000 PDFs, what does that do to their usage metrics? Have they just been tipped up to the next tier for publishers? Are they being charged more than they should? They really need to think about this, and we've got evidence where that has actually happened. So the more of this we can pass out to libraries and make them aware of this, I think the more that they'll take this a little bit more seriously and start blocking these things from their own sites. So what can you do? Okay, so report intrusions to the authorities is aimed mostly at kind of library staff, but it's also publishers. Publishers have to get involved with this and help us spread the word around to all the libraries around the world as well. You've got to ensure that your proxy servers are secure, especially to dictionary attacks. You've got to educate people about if they get an email from somebody in IT asking them to change their password, it's probably not correct, right? But there's so many phishing attempts, it's just crazy. We've got to educate students and staff on protecting their personal data. Having one username and password for everything is pretty dangerous. We would say that they need several, and those passwords need to be pretty strong, having symbols, numbers, alphabetized letters. And we've got to tell and push out to the libraries the effects of using LibGen and all of these Sci-Hub things. And they should register all of their contact details with us, so if we find these hacks, we can get in touch with people pretty clearly. And also for libraries, allowing access within the libraries to Sci-Hub, I think, is just simply crazy. Libraries have firewalls that protect everything coming in. But if you're sat within that library and you go out to Sci-Hub and start bringing PDFs back through that firewall, what effect do you think that has? Is there anything being placed in those PDFs? Do we really know what's coming back through the pipes when they start downloading these things? So what are we doing? So we've created a new system, which is helping with passwords, spammers, hackers, crackers, piracy. And it's really a kind of a community liaison hub where All publishers can feed information into it, libraries can feed information into it, and then that information every day is researched by us. We find out who owns everything. We store it in a huge database, and every day we pass out a complete block list to libraries and publishers. And that's what we need help with, to get more people on board working with us, because this will only work if we all do it. You can also sign up and make sure that your IP addresses are correct with publishers. That's another way of keeping content safe. So we're working with UK and US authorities to try and help with this situation. It is a big thing. We're working with lots of consortia now and lots of libraries. We're speaking with many consortia about pushing out our block lists to all of their members. And we actively search the web every day for username and passwords that are stolen. I think we're monitoring about 29 different websites now that boast of having personal credentials that get into library content. There you go. Thank you very much. I think I've fired through that quite quickly.
So thanks very much. So as mentioned, my name is Joseph DeMarco, and I'm a lawyer that was involved in one of the efforts that have been brought to date so far to address from the legal point of view some of the issues that have arisen with regard to Sci-Hub. And as mentioned in the introduction, I spent a big chunk of my professional career chasing cyber criminals as a federal prosecutor in New York. I ran the cybercrime unit there, and one common thread that I saw as a prosecutor and continue to see today in my work for intellectual property owners is really the quest for the golden key, right? Because if a criminal does not have the golden key, the key that will allow them to access the database that they want, they really don't have much. And there are lots of ways that they can get that golden key. But once they get that golden key, they've got access. And I will tell you that in 20 years now of doing work both in the public sector and in the private sector, I have never yet once met a cyber criminal who set out to gain access to a database for one purpose and only confined themselves to that one purpose once they got inside the database, right? That's not how criminals think, right? A criminal doesn't break into your home just to steal the silver, okay? They break in to steal the silver, the jewels, the electronics, the cash, and anything else worth stealing, okay? They don't think like we do, right? They don't think like we do. If any of you are staying at this hotel, you booked a room, you're staying in the hotel for conference convenience. Maybe you'll watch TV, maybe you'll make some phone calls. You're not hosting kind of an illegal rave, okay, party. That's how criminals think, though. They think that once they get in, whatever they get in, whatever they get access to is fair game. And so, from my perspective, as a lawyer that's worked in this field, whatever you think about open access, whatever you think about what the pricing of articles, books, journals, or newspapers should be, whatever you think about the ability of publishers to deliver content in new and efficient and innovative ways across the digital economy that we live in today, whatever you think about that, always bear in mind that at the same time, the cyber criminals are thinking about it in a very different way. We were retained by Elsevier a number of years ago to seek legal redress against Sci-Hub and its principals in the United States. We filed a lawsuit in the United States District Court in Manhattan in June of 2015, a complaint accusing Sci-Hub and its principals of massive illegal piracy, of violations of federal computer hacking laws, and as well violations of federal laws related to access device, essentially password credential sharing and theft. One of the principals responded to the lawsuit by telephonically appearing or attempting to appear, and essentially admitted to the court her role in the operation of the Sci-Hub platform. The defense that she proffered was that the company was charging too much for its articles and that information should be free. None of the other defendants appeared. We continued on with the litigation. we were able to persuade the court to serve everyone through electronic means, through email. So we actually were able to bring them before the court, which was an important precedent to set for other future cases. And we were also able to persuade the court to allow us to have authority over other parties besides the defendants who were integral to the operation of the defendant's website. We had tried over the course of many months to persuade some of the TLD, top-level domain name operators, to delink the pirate sites from their registries as a violation of the terms of service. To no avail, they all required a court order. We got a court order. And by getting a court order, we were able to take down, at least for the time being, and we knew that it was only going to be for the time being, the prime real estate of many of these pirate sites. Now, we knew going in that the pirates would not give up. We knew that they would re-register their domains using non-US-based top-level domain providers. They would reroute traffic and do all of the things that they're very, very good at doing when it comes to breaking the law and violating people's rights. And they did, but we felt that it was important to bring the lawsuit to, number one, demonstrate to the court, to the industry, to the world, that what they were doing was wrong, to tell our story about the massive scale of infringement that was going on, to describe in detail the continual, repeated, and very sophisticated theft of access credentials and compromise of university systems, and to make sure that, at least in one place, some account was to be held for this. All of our pleadings are in the public domain. If you see me afterwards and give me a business card, I'm happy to send you a link to where you can get the pleadings. And it tells the story in great detail. So we brought the lawsuit to show that it could be done, that it would be done, that it was important to do, and that it was worth doing. Obviously, there have been other efforts by other publishers around the world to apply local law in different ways. Obviously, national laws are different throughout the world, and there are different remedies available to in different countries to address the problem of piracy. But I would submit to you, and I'm happy to answer questions on this. I know we're going to want to leave some time for questions. I would submit to you that as you think about where entities like Sci-Hub and other entities that seek to make access of paid content available for free, where that should sit in the publishing world, I think it is important to remember, number one, what I just mentioned, that once criminals gain access, they rarely confine themselves, never confine themselves to one type of crime. And number two, that the things that these cyber criminals are doing will not just stop with piracy. You know, when you think about it, all of you in this room have gotten letters from entities that have had your personal data telling you that they lost their personal data. Maybe you were a Target shopper, maybe you were a Home Depot shopper, maybe you had a Sears credit card, maybe you were a Hilton Hotels customer. And at a certain point, you got a letter saying, "Dear valued customer, we write to inform you that while we have no reason to believe that your information has been used to commit identity theft, we nevertheless are required to tell you, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, credit monitoring, et cetera, et cetera." Anyone in the room not get one of those letters, right? You've all gotten those letters. Why have you gotten those letters? You've gotten those letters because courts and legislators have realized that a simple piece of information, as simple as your name and email address and your password, is the very first step to a very long series of crimes and wrongdoing. It's why the modern trend in data breach laws has states passing laws like California just did, saying to companies and organizations, if you lose someone's username and password, you've got to tell them. And you've got to offer them credit monitoring. You've got to offer all these remedial suites of services. Billions of dollars of our national economic life is being spent to protect your rights in that regard. And I would submit to you that the reason why that money's being spent, the reason why you're getting those letters, is because many people use those credentials not just for one platform or site, they use them across a range of platforms and sites. And I can tell you from having looked at the actual evidence of the actual intrusions that actually occurred in this actual case, that I know for a fact that usernames and passwords were being shared across platforms. And so for those of you at universities who have, usernames of students that have passwords like UConn students, go Huskies, right? Dollars to donut, those passwords, those credentials are being shared by that student across other platforms. So even if you didn't care about your own networks and the integrity of your own networks, I would submit to you it's worth caring about your students. They may be off doing other things, they may not care, but I would submit to you that you should care. So the lawsuit went on. The defendants never showed up in court. You know, they're very courageous online, but not one of them came to show their face in open court, to stand up and put their money where their mouth was, to put their reputation and their pocketbook on the line. Remember, this is a civil case, not a criminal case. They didn't even have the courage to do that. We got a default judgment, and the case is resolved. Other publishers have sued. Small publishers were part of our efforts. It was a collective effort. We were obviously leading on behalf of Elsevier, but we had a number of other entities that were supporting us. But I would submit to you that as you think about this problem, if you perceive it to be a problem, and what the solution should be, you should think about some of the legal issues I've mentioned, some of the policy issues I've mentioned, and some of the reputational, business, and social implications of what's going on here. Thank you.
Having technical difficulties. I'll be in there. I'm good? No. Okay, great. Thank you. Hi, my name is Sari Francis, and I currently lead the IP protection program at IEEE. Today I'm going to discuss the impact of Sci-Hub on the publishing and academic community and how we're collaborating together to help mitigate the risks, and also what IEEE is doing in this space. And I know Andrew touched on a lot of similarities, so we're going to probably breeze through some of these slides as well. But as you know, protecting intellectual property from illegal access and distribution is a concern relevant to the entire publishing industry, from publishers to librarians to authors. And as publishers, it damages our reputation, costs us money, and could ultimately cause irreparable harm to every publisher's business models. And as hackers become more sophisticated, we are becoming increasingly vulnerable. Although there's no one perfect solution, nor can we guarantee 100% protection from these threats, but we can be smarter, more proactive, and effective. So last fall, I shared this slide, which depicts Sci-Hub activity that we received, this data, which was a result of us IEEE contacting a university about Sci-Hub activity. And it continues to occur. We received this list as of this past March, and it's encompassing more than 450 sites. So it's 100 more sites, 4 times the amount of requests, and this is an example of the continued vulnerability that we all share. And we're receiving this data continuously as we contact customers. But this was one illegal attempt to access IEEE Xplore. And had we not alerted these universities of these infractions, the activity would have continued to occur. But additionally, what we learned about this particular case was that the user, their password was very weak, not a surprise. And also there were 20 different IP addresses that accessed this one user's account. Guess where that was from? Russia. So, yeah, and it just continuously happens on a daily basis, and so we're monitoring it. So to switch gears a little bit, I just want to give you a little bit of information and background on the IEEE's protection program. So we have a decade of experience with a team of 2 people, And during this time, we've established partnership with Covington, which is a web monitoring service that sends takedown notices on our behalf. And a key cornerstone of our program is our relationship with the CPPC, and that's comprised of over 30 different publishers, many of whom we have initiatives with. And we're also engaged in discussions with not just other publishers, but other vendors like OCLC, who manage and own EasyProxy, and also vendors like PSI, who work with the publishing industry to eliminate subscription abuse. And these organizations have been instrumental in strengthening our program, and as a result, several initiatives have been created as of these discussions. And we also have some internal efforts at IEEE, so I'm going to talk to you more about that. So obviously we monitor for misuse, we're discussing watermarking, and also there's some technical solutions that I'm going to talk to you about in a bit. So I think Andrew already touched on some of these points here about how Sci-Hub steals content, so I'm going to just quickly go through them. But as he mentioned, they're targeting users with stealing user credentials and phishing attacks. And we actually had one university that actually sent us a screenshot. It looked exactly like it was coming from the university, and asking them to change their username and password, asking the student to change his or her username and password, and it had a link on it too, and it looked legitimate. So it is really scary. But who are the key players in this space? So who's really responsible for protecting content? It's the end user, it's the institutions themselves, and IEEE as well as other publishers. So as mentioned before, I think we're encouraging end users to adopt stronger passwords. And not your dog's name or your kid's birthday or something like that. It really needs to be something that's really undetectable. And so we're working with, as IEEE, we're working with, partnering with institutions to not only let them know what's happening in this space and, contacting them about Sci-Hub activity, but letting them know that this is happening on their firewalls. And then obviously coming into publishers' electronic resources. So as I already mentioned, we're contacting universities, but we think that we want to encourage institutions to make changes to their security systems. And while there's no standardization, like banks have a certain standard that they have to adhere to, there's no standardization for security for universities. So it really runs the gamut, and we've talked to universities that have their own IT staff at their libraries, and then there are some who don't even know how to read an EasyProxy log file. So it really runs the gamut on what can actually be done and the resources that libraries have. So we're working with libraries to help them and educate them, and then provide them with tools. And I'll get to talk to you about more of that in a little bit. So unfortunately, why is this? I wasn't able to show this interactive map that my IT department put together, so it's not technically working. But this is the activity that we've been tracking through our customers. So these are all the requests that are coming into IEEE Explore, and as you can see, that the numbers are pretty great in the United States, and then also in Australia and the UK. So you may not be able to see all the numbers, but if you want to, I can show you later after this session if you're really interested in seeing all the activity live. And this graph, and we've also we're not only tracking the activity, but we're also tracking the amount of content that's being stolen on a daily basis. So this graph shows the number of PDFs that were stolen each month as of October of 2017. I'm not exactly quite sure what happened in February to just completely skyrocket the numbers, but it's mostly around 4,000 averaging a month. But I did notice that the type of content that was stolen in February were mostly our entire collection, well, not entire collection, most of our 2017 conference proceedings. So normally it's journals, standards, those types of content, but there was a lot of that occurred in February. So as a community, what are we doing? So as I mentioned, we're tracking Sci-Hub activity and alerting customers. I'm not going to get too much into RA21 because I think most of you know what RA21 is, but I think it really runs parallel on what we're doing as a community as far as protecting users' credentials and making it seamless for them to access. Because I think that's what Sci-Hub is really all about. It's so easy to access and get content for free. But we're also requesting, as I mentioned, showed you the slide before with all the publishers' requests. We're asking customers to provide us with data, and so we're sending that along to private investigators as well as PSI to do further analysis on that data. And they've been very accommodating, and it's been really great to have people that understand copyright take this seriously, and that they're not just saying, well, just turn me back on. So we're not only working with other publishers, but we're working with these academic institutions. So one particular customer that we've worked with, they developed a technical solution, and so as a result, we are working with OCLC on developing that, expanding that solution, and we're hoping to have that available within the next several months. And as Rick mentioned, that we also recently formed, and that was, not so recently, but in September 2017, the Sci-Hub Executive Steering Group, and that consists of over 14 representatives from different publishers. And that also has 4 functional working groups. So there's a technical working group, legal working group, communications, and university relations working group. And why did that not go? Sorry. And then lastly, we're working with, as Andrew mentioned, is the IP intrusion database, which is the threat intelligence database system that can work with not only just publishers, but other organizations. And we currently have about 17 different organizations that are participating in this initiative. And so we're working also to coordinate with the academic community to help them understand what, to look forward to receiving these notices. And it's not just Sci-Hub activity that we're looking at. We're looking at all, as Andrew mentioned, hackers, scrapers, spammers, you name it. So it's really a centralized way for us to figure out what's happening within the publishing industry and also assist our customers as well. So overall, we're continuing to seek and test technical advancements, and so we're staying on top of changing Sci-Hub domain names. ACS did a great job on eliminating some of those sites. But we're continuing to also collaborate with other publishers and organizations. So, as I mentioned before, and we're also speaking at other events, so STM and ASEE, just to really get the word out and to collaborate and on and offline with the academic community. And lastly, we're working internally at IEEE to discuss ways to thwart the activity, so can't really discuss that too much here, but if you're interested to learn more, feel free to contact me. So how can you get involved with all these initiatives? So you can see me after the session to find out more information, and also for Andrew to talk more about the IP intrusion database initiative. He's heading that. And so thank you very much for your time.
All right, so we have about 20 minutes left. We have a lovely assistant here from Elsevier who has a microphone. Tom, Is this the first time you've been called lovely today?
No, it's like the fifth.
So, comments, questions for our panelists?
Hi, Ted Campion, New England Journal of Medicine. What we've heard makes clear that this is a massive, sophisticated operation. Who's financing it all? Where are the bucks coming from, and why are they investing them in this?
I'll start a little bit about evidence of who's doing this. When we started working with IEEE and we started monitoring the IP addresses that were being used by Sci-Hub, we very quickly had about 100,000 IP addresses used in 57 different countries, and they all resulted back to a depot data center in the middle of Moscow. Now, if anybody knows how Russia works and thinks that a large operation like that could be working in the middle of Moscow without the Russian authorities knowing about it, I think that would be pretty unclear. For the scale of it and how much money of it is, we had some investigators searching the dark web to try and find out some more information. I think they must have tripped some traps that they set. And overnight, they moved all 100,000 IP addresses so that they didn't appear to be coming from Moscow. They appeared to be coming from the Seychelles. Now, that is a huge operation. That is an operation that is a lot of money. There must be a lot of people working on this. But from what I've been told by the authorities, the Russians are 10 years ahead of us. And we're not playing with a level playing field, are we? Because if any of us tried to do anything like that, we'd go to jail for 10 years, whereas they can do it with impunity. So where they're getting their money from, who knows, right? But I think we all pretty much know. But it's a very, very big operation.
Can I ask a follow-up question? There was a much publicized incident some months back when the Russian government did something that Alexandra Albakian did not approve of, and she temporarily shut down access to Sci-Hub to users within Russia. That's the version of the story that I heard. How does that square with the explanation that the Russian government, or the hypothesis that the Russian government itself is behind Sci-Hub?
Well, it wasn't actually the Russian government. It was some Russian researchers that named a parasite after her, which I thought was pretty bloody funny. It gave me a great laugh. So that wasn't actually the Russian government. That was Russian researchers who I think, they're not stupid. They know what goes on. And then you don't have to love everything your president does, right?
No, I don't.
Give me the mic. No, I think that's a good point, though, that once we saw that was happening and she shut down the Russians, that were like, oh, well, maybe she's not connected with the government after all. I mean, but we don't know that, obviously. There's no hard evidence for that.
Joe, anything to add? Okay.
I think I'm on.
We have a virtual question.
We do have a virtual question from Duke University Press asking if RA21 is the only reasonable way to subvert the appeal of Sci-Hub.
No.
I mean, it's one way, and I think there's different views on this, but anything that is going to continue to use usernames and passwords is going to continue to be hacked, right? I think anything that is trying to look at different ways of authenticating is laudable, and we should help with that. But it's got to be taken with security in mind and the security of credentials and everything like that. It's not the only way. IP intrusion that we started with a large group of publishers and the American Association of Publishers will help, because that is gathering intelligence and pushing out the results of that intelligence out to not only publishers but to libraries. Libraries need to understand what is going on, and they need to start blocking this and making their patrons aware of the dangers of revealing their usernames and passwords and therefore their profiles and their credentials and everything else. So it's not the only thing.
And I'll just, sorry, if I could just jump in for a sec. This is one of the great challenges that we face. I say, speaking as a librarian, it can be very hard to get my colleagues interested in this issue. The story that I always share is of a friend of mine who works for a small society publisher who found out that Sci-Hub was fishing for network credentials on her small liberal arts college campus. She sent a message about it to her IT folks and a message to the librarians, and the way she reported it to me is that the IT folks wigged out and the librarians never responded. And one reason that we have a hard time getting a lot of interest in this on the library side is that when you talk about it in terms of illegal access to licensed content, the response is, well, this is just a symptom. The real problem is Elsevier, or publishers who restrict access to content. Sci-Hub is a symptom of the problem. It's not the problem. And obviously, this is a difficult, complex conversation to have. Anyway, sorry, Sari.
Oh, thanks. No, I just wanted to also follow up with Andrew. So, and that's why we're developing these technical solutions. So for the question for Duke University Press, so we do have some technical solutions that we are going to communicate more widely, but we have to be very careful. So I can't really go into too much detail about those solutions, but you can always talk to me offline about that. Thanks.
And actually, we're working with the membership department at IEEE to come up with a way of potentially using the MAC addresses that we all have on our machines as like a secondary authentication. The problem you have with anything you do with Sci-Hub right now is if you put more barriers in place and make it harder to access the legitimate content, the more you have where the possibility of driving them to Sci-Hub. So it's a really interesting thing that's going on at the moment. Putting too much up could force them to go the other way. So, it's a really hard position to be in.
Yes.
Hi, Keith from Clarivate Analytics. A couple of things were touched on about the appeal of Sci-Hub, and I'd be curious to get a discussion going around this because it's my understanding that people even that do have access through their institution are still going to Sci-Hub because just the user experience is just simple, right? And I will just suggest there is something that publishers can do. There is a tool called Copernio. Full disclosure, it's a Clarivate tool now, but it's free. And it's it's an extension that sits in the browser. And it uses the credentials for the institution, no matter where the researcher is, to get to the publisher's version of record. And for me, this is one thing publishers can do, is they can promote the use of tools like this that will actually try to counteract the appeal of Sci-Hub, because I just think people are drawn to it because it's just so simple. So how can we come up with simple solutions that help users get to the content that their institutions are already serving up for them?
And is it actually possible, this is one of the things I really struggle with, is it possible to make legitimate access as friction-free as stealing?
Yep.
The image that I always have in my mind is, can we ever make it as easy to walk into a store, as easy to pay for a candy bar as it is to walk in, take the candy bar off the shelf and leave?
Right.
Or is there a certain amount of friction that is inevitable to legitimate access? I don't know the answer to that.
I don't either, but I think there's something we should look at there as an institution.
Just one comment on that. I'm not wholly sold on the fact that it's just that it's easy. I think it's because they have everything. And no library in the world, no university can afford to have a site license with every single publisher in the world. It's just not possible. Not even Oxford or Harvard. So even if you are a researcher and you're researching in your daily work, you're going to come across a paywall where you're going to be asked to pay $35 at some point. Whereas if you can access a site where you're not going to get any time during the day a paywall that's going to ask you to pay $35, that I think is why people go, not just the ease. Because I think, library portals, you go and sit in a library and you look on the library portal and you search across everything. That's pretty simple. And these are students doing degrees, right? So it's not just that, I don't think. I think it's the fact that they have everything.
Yes, Lisa.
Hi, thank you so much. I'm always interested in making things easier for users. Lisa Hinchliff at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. But given, I think this is a unique panel to really be focused on sort of not the user experience of Sci-Hub, but the actual nefarious activity of Sci-Hub. One of the things I'm curious is whether we are also seeing attacks on the publishers' networks themselves. So, I mean, we've talked a lot here about compromised user credentials through institutions, but I'm guessing you all have a lot of staff who are, logging into your networks and have access to your databases. So is there also intrusion that's happening directly to, not coming through our users? Or are users just so easy to get through that no one needs to go for your staff?
That's a really good question. Thank you, Lisa. I think before the activity really ensued that we saw that was coming through customer accounts, that was in December of 2016. Before that, it really wasn't skyrocketing. It was a lot less activity. And what we did do was block at IEEE, we blocked all anonymous IP addresses because that's how we knew that they were accessing. But they switched gears, and then in 2006, they went right back into through users' accounts. So any of the IP addresses that we do collect from customers, because we can't see what's happening on their firewalls, we're collecting them, as Andrew mentioned, that we have about 100,000 IP addresses, and we're blocking them as well. So that's another reason why publishers should also participate in the IP intrusion database.
Thank you. Couldn't have done it better myself. I think it's because it's so easy right now, the way they're doing it. And what we are all got to be careful of is when we are going to do something about it, there's some things that we can't talk about that are going to be happening in the next few months, block this route, they're going to find another route. So we're already trying to be ahead of that, and we're looking at all proxy providers, so all remote access systems, and getting them to be able to do the things that I can't talk about. So we've got to get ahead of it, and the next thing will be they will try publishers. But now we know, and we can track and we can look at it. The only real thing we've got to do is everybody get involved, put the information in so we can track it and we can block it. And even if it's whack-a-mole, if we're doing it in real time, we'll really damage them, because it's not easy to go out and get another 100,000 IP addresses. Right? It's not easy to do a lot of this, and I think we can really make a difference. And what we can't do is get them to take down what they've got. But what we've got to do is stop them getting all the new stuff. Because if we can make them less relevant, then hopefully people will go back to using their library portals. That's my hope anyway.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, at a very high level and a very general level, I represent a lot of corporations. And I've been doing this for 20 years. And I will tell you that it is a national goal of many nation states to steal every bit and byte of United States intellectual property that they can get their hands on. Every piece of knowledge that ever has been created in or by Americans in the United States, as well as other nations around the world, to obtain that is the national objective of many nation states. Now, there's nothing any one of us in this room can do about that problem, right? That is a nation-state problem. That is a problem of intelligence, cyber warfare, espionage, state policy, as well as international law. But you can do something about things that are happening inside the walls of your academic institution and with your students, right? So, think globally, act locally. The answer to your question is yes, for every American corporation, for every corporation that produces intellectual property. But this is really an example of something you can do concretely, which is part of the solution.
And also, these people are very sophisticated, and they're actually planting people inside corporates. Now, we've not got any evidence that they're doing that in the university system, but we do have a lot of evidence where families are threatened at home, and people are made to take secrets from corporations. Now, how are you going to stop that?
There aren't any jobs in the university, so they can't plant people very easily in the university.
So
There's a question on the floor, but I just wanted to see if we have any from virtual attendees.
Thank you, Rick. We did get a follow-up from Duke, and Andrew sort of addressed it, but I will ask it, because it was sort of a question of good ideas for delivering something as appealing as Sci-Hub, as a one-stop shop, if there's something that publishers collectively could do in approaching it that way.
So something that has everything, no friction, and it's free. Go.
Right. You can do that Monday, right?
I think the difficulty that publishers have that maybe films and music don't have is that people like a publisher. Now, I worked for the ACS for 11 years and went all over the world with them, and people loved the ACS. Chemists all over love it. They would go to ACS. They're not going to the film. It's not like somebody's going to a film studio to see everything they've done, but they do with publishers. And I think the difficulty publishers have is they want to capture people, they want to give them that experience of the publisher and everything that the publisher has. So trying to create an iTunes for publishers, I think, is really difficult, because then the identity of the publisher could be lost. And I think that's another difficulty that we have with that. And also, you don't buy a site license for films or music, and publishing is bought in a different way. So there's lots more challenges, and it's a lot more complex, I think, than trying to solve downloaded CDs or music or films.
Question at the back.
Yeah, hi. Stuart Maxwell from Scholarly IQ. It's a question, I think, probably for Joe. As we sort of come more towards sort of data protection and the understanding of value of data, are there potentially any liabilities for the provider of a technology, say from a librarian, that they are maybe providing the channel that somebody might lose their data through this phishing and scraping, and they might actually have some sort of threat to their business from sort of those people who are victims of it, saying, actually, but you're the one that exposed me to this?
It's a great question, and if you were to ask me who are the most creative people in America, I would say they're the plaintiffs' class action lawyers that conceive of these types of causes of action, right? And so it would not surprise me at all if at some point, enterprising plaintiffs' class action lawyers who have sued every American corporation that has ever had a data breach. I mean, that's what happens, right, when you have a data breach in America and you're a corporation. Number one, you have to do this kind of public mea culpa, report to the regulators, report to the victims, and as night follows day, you're then sued in a plaintiff's class action lawsuit, which you will settle because you will never take that to trial because it's so terribly embarrassing, right? So it would not surprise me in the least if at some point that happens. They're very good business people. They will pick their target wisely. It will probably be an entity that is not as big as a major, let's say, private university. State universities may have sovereign immunity or may not. It'll probably be a well-respected mid-size educational institution, one that could pay, a seven-figure settlement to make it all go away. It would not surprise me at all if that lawsuit is coming. Not to scare people even more.
All right, we are effectively out of time. I think there's one more question outstanding. As long as it's a yes or no question, I think we can entertain it.
I'm not sure it is a yes or no question, so do you want to entertain it or not?
Please, go ahead. You're an award winner, so I think we have to go ahead.
Thanks. It's kind of been hinted at, stealing the silver. Criminals don't just come and steal the silver, they're stealing other things. I'm just curious about the panel's opinion on the fact that we've heard posited that Sci-Hub doesn't even care about scholarly content at all. Like, it's actually maybe just a front for a whole bigger other thing. And, bringing down scholarly communications is potentially just a side aspect, but that's not what they're interested in. It is about the credentials. It could be some huge, a big, large-scale national hacking thing, and it's just a side project. I just was very curious as to the panelists' expert opinions on this.
I would say we don't know. We don't know.
In a way, it doesn't matter, does it?
We'll probably never really know.
Yeah. My view is it probably started with somebody in Kazakhstan who wanted to do research, who kept getting faced with $35 a pop for her research. Now, you can go and say, well, how poor is Kazakhstan? If maybe all the money wasn't taken by all the corrupt officials, they probably could afford to have site licenses all of the universities. But I think it probably started off quite well-meaning, but I think now the evidence shows us that it's probably been hijacked, and as we've seen lately with all of the Facebook attacks, they are targeting everything we do. The Scottish referendum, the UK votes for Brexit, your presidential election, everything. They are disrupting everything. And what I think, and somebody said to me, one of the reasons why the wall came down is when, Mr. Reagan had his Star Wars up there, and what did they have? A load of rusty old tanks and not much. And this man is not going to let that happen again, is he? He is very aggressive, and he will make sure that they have the best of everything. And the way of getting the best of everything is make sure you got the best research. So what came first? Probably the idea of getting annoyed because she's asked to pay $35 for a research article. But that's my view.
Sari, anything to add?
No, I think I agree with what Joe was saying mostly. We don't know. We don't.
Well, would you join me in thanking our panel again, and thank you for your excellent conversation.